thought $8.5 million would save my marriage. Instead, it exposed the monster I married and the daughter I never thought I'd see again. My name is Sarah, and 3 months ago, I was a simple elementary school teacher in Charleston, South Carolina, living paycheck to paycheck with my struggling musician husband. Then, my estranged grandmother's lawyer called with news that would change everything, or so I thought. I was driving across the Cooper River Bridge, heart pounding with excitement, clutching the inheritance papers in one hand while steering with the other. I couldn't wait to tell David that our financial struggles were finally over. We could pay off our debts. He could focus on his music without the constant stress of bills. And maybe, just maybe, we could finally start the family we'd been putting off. The rain started as a light drizzle, but by the time I reached the bridge's peak, it was pouring. I remember thinking how fitting it was, washing away our old life to make room for the new. I had no idea that in 60 seconds, my world would literally crash around me. And when I woke up, the man I'd loved for 6 years would have already moved on with someone else. The 18-wheeler came out of nowhere. One moment, I was planning our future. The next, I was watching in slow motion as the massive truck jackknifed across 3 lanes of wet asphalt. The driver had lost control on the rain-slicked bridge, and physics was about to teach me a lesson I'd never forget. I jerked the wheel hard right, but there was nowhere to go. The guardrail of the Cooper River Bridge rushed toward me like a steel embrace I didn't want. The sound of metal crushing metal filled the air, a symphony of destruction that seemed to last forever and an instant simultaneously. My Honda Civic crumpled like a tin can. The airbag exploded in my face with the force of a punch, and I felt my ribs crack under the pressure of the seatbelt. Glass showered down like deadly confetti as my car spun twice before coming to rest against the bridge's concrete barrier. The inheritance papers scattered across the dashboard. $8.5 million in legal documents now mixed with broken glass and my own blood. I tried to call out, but only a weak wheeze escaped my lips. Pain radiated through every nerve ending. My right leg was twisted at an impossible angle, and I could taste copper in my mouth. Through the spider-webbed windshield, I could see other cars stopping, people running toward the wreckage. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A voice called through the chaos. "We're going to get you out!" As consciousness faded, my last coherent thought was about David. How would they tell him? Would he be at our apartment, working on another song that would never sell? Or would he be out networking, like he'd been doing so often lately? The sirens grew louder, then softer, then disappeared entirely as darkness claimed me. I didn't know it then, but I would wake up 3 days later to discover that my husband had already told everyone I was dead. He'd cleaned out our joint bank account, changed the locks on our apartment, and was making moves on my inheritance. With help from someone I never could have imagined. The truck driver died on impact. I survived with 17 broken bones and a shattered life. But the real crash was just beginning. Let me tell you about the man I thought I married. David Chen was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, artistic, passionate about his music. We met 6 years ago at a coffee shop open mic night in downtown Charleston. I was grading papers at a corner table when his voice cut through the ambient chatter. He was singing an original song about lost dreams and second chances, his fingers dancing across guitar strings like he was born to make music. After his set, He approached my table with that crooked smile that made my heart skip. "You look like someone who appreciates real art," he said, gesturing to the stack of my students' creative writing assignments. What I didn't recognize then were the red flags disguised as romantic gestures. How he always seemed to need just a little help with rent. How his musical equipment was always more important than our utilities. How he'd disappear for hours without explanation, claiming he was finding inspiration or building his network. David had this way of making his problems sound like our shared dreams. "Once my music takes off," became his answer to every financial concern. "You'll see, Sarah. We're building something beautiful together." For 6 years, I supported that dream. My teacher's salary covered our modest apartment near the French Quarter, while David pursued his passion. I believed in him because I wanted to believe that love meant sacrifice. My grandmother Rose was David's polar opposite: practical, successful, intimidating. She'd built a boutique hotel empire across the Southeast, starting with a single bed and breakfast in Savannah that grew into 15 luxury properties. Rose had always disapproved of my choices, especially David. "That boy has hungry eyes," she'd warned me during our last conversation 2 years ago. But not for music. I should have listened. Red flags look like green lights when you're wearing rose-colored glasses. I need to tell you about Emma, though I didn't know her name was Emma until 3 months ago. 18 years ago, I was a 17-year-old high school senior with college dreams and a boyfriend who disappeared the moment I showed him the positive pregnancy test. My parents were devastated, not by my situation, but by what the neighbors would think. We lived in a small South Carolina town where everyone knew everyone's business. "You'll ruin our family's reputation," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "We can't let people know." They sent me to live with my grandmother Rose in Charleston for the pregnancy. Those 6 months were simultaneously the loneliest and most transformative of my life. Rose, despite her stern exterior, showed me kindness I'd never experienced from my own parents. She held my hand during doctor's appointments, helped me research adoption agencies, and never once made me feel ashamed. "Sometimes loving someone means making the hardest choice," she told me as my due date approached. The birth was complicated, 36 hours of labor that ended with an emergency C-section. But when they placed that tiny girl in my arms, she was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and eyes that seemed to look right through to my soul. The nurse took one photo, me holding her, both of us crying. The adoptive parents were wonderful. Mark and Linda Stewart, a couple from Atlanta who'd struggled with infertility for 8 years. They were teachers, like I hoped to become, and their love for children radiated from every word they spoke. Linda cried when she first held Emma. Yes. They let me name her and promised to tell her about me when she was old enough to understand. I kept that photo hidden in a music box Rose had given me, along with the hospital bracelet and a tiny pink hat the nurses had put on Emma's head. It was my secret shrine to the daughter I'd never know. After the adoption, Rose helped me apply for college scholarships. She paid for my education on one condition. Make something of yourself, Sarah. Make this sacrifice matter. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in elementary education and moved back to Charleston, where Rose offered me a job managing one of her smaller properties. But I wanted to teach. I wanted to shape young minds and maybe, in some small way, honor the daughter I'd given up by caring for other people's children. Rose was disappointed, but respected my choice. We maintained a cordial but distant relationship. She'd send birthday cards with substantial checks that I never cashed, wanting to prove I could make it on my own. When I married David, she attended the wedding, but pulled me aside afterward. "I've seen men like him before," she whispered. "They take and take until there's nothing left to give." Our relationship became even more strained after that. David resented Rose's wealth and what he called her judgmental attitude. He refused to attend family dinners, claiming Rose made him feel less than. Looking back, I think he recognized a worthy opponent. The last time I saw Rose was at the hospital 2 months before she died. Cancer had taken her weight and most of her strength, but her eyes were still sharp as razors. "I'm leaving you everything, Sarah," she said, grasping my hand with surprising force. "The hotels, the properties, all of it. You're the only family I trust." I protested, suggesting charities or distant cousins, but Rose was adamant. "You have my strength," she said. "You just haven't discovered it yet. Sometimes our greatest gifts come from our deepest wounds." Waking up in MUSC hospital felt like emerging from a nightmare into a worse reality. Everything hurt. My ribs screamed with each breath. My right leg was immobilized in a complex apparatus of pins and screws. And my head pounded with a concussion that made the fluorescent lights feel like daggers in my brain. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the growing dread in my chest. "Mrs. Chen?" A gentle voice interrupted my assessment of injuries. "I'm Linda, your nurse. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days? The words echoed in my foggy mind. "My husband," I croaked. "David, has he been here?" Linda's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "We've called the emergency contact number several times. He hasn't responded yet." That was impossible. David might be absent-minded about bills or chores, but he would never ignore calls about me being in the hospital. Unless... "Can you try again?" I asked. "Maybe his phone died." Linda nodded, but I caught the look she exchanged with Dr. Martinez, the trauma surgeon who'd just entered the room. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Over the next 12 hours, my calls to David went straight to voicemail. His usual greeting, "You've reached David Chen, Charleston's next big musical sensation," now sounded mockingly optimistic. Text messages showed as delivered but unread. On day 4, I finally received a response. "Heard about accident. In the middle of recording session with producer. Will visit when schedule clears up." I stared at the message until the words blurred. Recording session? David hadn't mentioned any producer. And the tone, clinical, distant, was nothing like my husband's usual communication style. "Something's not right," I told Linda during her evening rounds. "David would be here. Something must have happened to him too." But Linda had news that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Chen, we received a strange call this afternoon. Someone claiming to be your husband's representative, asking about your condition and any personal effects that might need to be returned to family." Personal effects. Like I was already dead. That night, I asked Linda to help me access social media on her tablet. What I found there shattered what remained of my world. David's Facebook status, posted 2 days after my accident. Devastated to share that my beloved wife, Sarah, didn't survive the bridge accident. Planning a celebration of life for this weekend. She would want us to focus on the music that brought us together. Celebration of life. Past tense. Didn't survive. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of friends offering condolences, sharing memories of me as if I were a ghost. Worse, David had responded to each one, playing the grieving widower with Oscar-worthy performance. Thank you for the support. Sarah always believed in following your dreams, which is why I'm honoring her memory by pursuing the recording contract she always wanted for me. Recording contract? What recording contract? And how was he honoring my memory by lying about my death? I scrolled further and found photos that stopped my heart. David at a restaurant with a young woman, both raising champagne glasses. The caption read, "Finding light in darkness." Sarah would want me to be happy. The woman looked familiar in a way that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't place her. Dark hair, elegant features, expensive clothes that David certainly couldn't afford. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of polished sophistication that takes money to maintain. Who was she? How long had David known her? And why did looking at her face trigger something deep in my memory, like an itch I couldn't scratch? I spent the rest of the night piecing together David's social media activity. The pattern was disturbing. 3 weeks before my accident, he'd started posting about new opportunities and exciting changes ahead. He'd been tagged at expensive restaurants and art galleries I'd never heard of, always with the same mysterious woman. But it was the legal documents that truly terrified me. Using the tablet, I searched for information about my grandmother's estate. Rose's will had been a matter of public record once it was filed, and what I found made me physically sick. David had somehow obtained a copy and was already in contact with Rose's lawyers, claiming rights as my surviving spouse. According to the online records, someone had filed a death certificate in my name, a fraudulent death certificate that listed David as next of kin and beneficiary. He wasn't just moving on from our marriage. He was actively stealing my inheritance by pretending I was dead. The woman in the photos wasn't just his new girlfriend. She was his accomplice. But there was something else, something that nagged at me as I studied her face in the dim hospital light. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head in photos. Even her smile, it all felt hauntingly familiar. I'd seen that face before, but not on social media. I'd seen it in a mirror, 18 years younger and full of hope instead of calculated ambition. The truth hit me like a second collision. I was staring at my daughter. Emma, my baby girl who I'd held for 5 precious minutes before giving her to Mark and Linda Stewart, was now a woman sitting in expensive restaurants with my husband, helping him steal my inheritance while the world believed I was dead. My hands trembled as I zoomed in on the photo. There was no mistaking it now. She had my eyes, my chin, even the small scar through her left eyebrow that I'd gotten falling off my bike at age 7. But more than physical features, she had something I recognized from old photos of myself, a determined set to her jaw that Rose had always called the Wallace stubborn streak. How had David found her? More importantly, how had he convinced her to participate in this elaborate fraud? I needed answers, and I needed help. "Linda," I called when my nurse appeared for medication rounds. "I need you to contact my grandmother's attorney. His name is Robert Fitzgerald. His office is on Broad Street." Linda hesitated. Mrs. Chen, it's almost midnight. This is an emergency. Tell him Sarah Wallace needs to speak with him immediately about Rose's estate. He'll take the call. 20 minutes later, Robert's familiar voice crackled through the hospital phone. Sarah? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. We have a serious problem. I know about David, I said without preamble. I know he's filed false death documents and is trying to claim my inheritance. It's worse than that, Robert said grimly. He came to my office yesterday with a young woman claiming to be Rose's granddaughter, your sister. They had documentation suggesting Rose's will should be contested, claiming family members were unfairly excluded. My sister. Of course. Emma couldn't claim inheritance rights as David's girlfriend, but as my sister, she'd have a legitimate challenge to the will. Robert, I don't have a sister, but I think I know who this woman really is. I took a shaky breath. 18 years ago, I gave a baby up for adoption. Her name was Emma Stewart. Silence stretched across the phone line. When Robert spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Sarah, are you absolutely certain about this? I need you to run a background check. Emma Stewart, adopted through Catholic Family Services in 1987. Parents Mark and Linda Stewart from Atlanta. If you're right, Robert said slowly, this changes everything. Your husband hasn't just committed fraud. He's manipulated a young woman who has no idea she's being used to steal from her own birth mother. The implications crashed over me in waves. Emma had been searching for me. That's how David found her. He'd used her desire to connect with her birth family as a weapon against both of us. There's something else, Robert continued. According to my sources, they've applied for a marriage license. If David marries this woman while still legally married to you, it's bigamy. But if he genuinely believes you're dead, he knows I'm alive, I interrupted. He has to know. The hospital has been calling his emergency contact number for days. Then he's building an insurance policy. If the fraud falls apart, he can claim he was deceived about your death. If it succeeds, he gains access to your inheritance through your daughter's inheritance rights. I felt sick. David had turned my daughter into an unwitting accomplice in the theft of her own birthright. Robert, I need you to do something for me. Contact Emma's adoptive parents. If I remember correctly, they were good people who promised to always be honest with her about the adoption. They need to know what's happening. What about David? He's expecting to meet with me again tomorrow to finalize the estate proceedings. I thought for a moment, anger building alongside my grief. Let him come. But Robert, record everything. I want proof of exactly what he's planning to steal. After hanging up, I lay in the darkness, processing the enormity of what I'd discovered. My husband was using my daughter to rob us both. Emma thought she'd found her birth family. Instead, she'd found a predator who saw her as a means to an end. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in betrayal. Robert called me early the next morning with updates that made my blood boil. I spoke with Mark and Linda Stewart, he reported. They're devastated. Emma has been searching for you since she turned 18, and David approached her 6 months ago, claiming to be your husband and saying you wanted to reconnect but were afraid of rejection. 6 months. That meant David had been planning this since before Rose's diagnosis became terminal. He told Emma that Rose was her grandmother too, Robert continued. That you'd been estranged from family because of the adoption. But now that Rose was dying, it was time to heal old wounds. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. David had used every detail from my past, information I'd shared in vulnerable moments during our marriage, to construct a lie that would prey on Emma's deepest longings. "What about the marriage license?" I asked. "Filed 3 days ago. The wedding is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at a small chapel downtown. Emma thinks it's romantic, a celebration of new family connections combined with a commitment ceremony." I closed my eyes, imagining my daughter's excitement at finally finding her birth family, only to be used as a pawn in her biological mother's destruction. "Robert, I need you to set up a meeting with David today. Tell him you have questions about the estate documentation. I want to see exactly how he's planning to play this." "Sarah, are you sure? If he realizes you're alive?" "He won't. I'll be listening from the conference room next door. Just get him talking." That afternoon, I positioned myself in Robert's law office with a wheelchair and a borrowed nurse's uniform from Linda, who'd insisted on accompanying me despite the risk to her job. Through a one-way mirror, I had a clear view of Robert's conference room. David arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a suit I'd never seen before and carrying himself with a confidence that seemed alien. This wasn't the struggling musician who'd stress-eaten cereal for dinner when we couldn't afford groceries. This was someone who'd already mentally spent my inheritance. He wasn't alone. Emma walked beside him, and seeing her in person nearly broke my resolve. She was beautiful, not just physically, but in the way she carried herself with genuine kindness. She held David's hand with the trust of someone who believed she'd finally found her place in the world. "Mr. Fitzgerald," David said, shaking Robert's hand. "Thank you for meeting with us. This has been such a difficult time." His performance was flawless. Grief-stricken widower, protective of his new love while honoring his deceased wife's memory. "Emma has been such a blessing," David continued, pulling her closer. "When Sarah told me about the adoption years ago, I never imagined I'd actually get to meet her daughter. It's like Sarah sent her to me in my darkest hour." Emma beamed at this manufactured sentiment. "David's told me so much about my mother. I just wish I could have met her before." "Yes, well," Robert interjected, "there are some irregularities with the death certificate that we need to discuss." I watched David's expression carefully. A micro flash of panic crossed his features before the mask of grief returned. "Irregularities?" David asked. "The timeline doesn't quite match hospital records. There's also the matter of Mrs. Chen's medical insurance still showing active coverage, which typically terminates immediately upon death notification." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sure it's just bureaucratic delay. You know how slow these systems can be." "Perhaps, but there's another issue. According to Rose's will, if Sarah had any living children, they would inherit equally with her." "Since Emma is Sarah's daughter?" "What?" Emma's voice cut through the room like a blade. David's hand shot out to squeeze her wrist, not affectionately, but as a warning. "Honey, we discussed this. Sarah considered you her daughter even though you weren't legally adopted by her." "No," Emma said, pulling away from him. "That's not what he just said. He said I'm Sarah's biological daughter." The room went dead silent. I could see David calculating, trying to figure out how to spin this new development. "Emma," Robert said gently, "didn't David tell you? Sarah gave birth to you when she was 17. She placed you for adoption with Mark and Linda Stewart. Emma's face went white. She turned to David with an expression of growing horror. You told me she was my stepmother. You said I was your late wife's stepdaughter from a previous relationship. I was protecting you, David said quickly. The truth was too painful. Sarah struggled with postpartum depression after giving you up. She made me promise never to tell you about the biological connection. Even I had to admire the smoothness of the lie, but Emma was sharper than David had anticipated. Show me the adoption records, she demanded. Honey, this isn't the time. Show me the records, David. If what you're saying is true, there will be documentation. David looked like a cornered animal. I don't have them with me. Then let's call Mark and Linda. They'll confirm your story, right? The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, David spoke, and for the first time, I heard his real voice, cold and calculating. Emma, you need to trust me. We're building something together here. Don't let legal complications ruin what we have. Legal complications? Emma's voice rose. You're talking about my mother, my birth mother, who you told me wanted to meet me before she died, and now I find out she's actually dead and I'm inheriting money from her? She stood up abruptly, her chair falling backward. This is insane. None of this makes sense. That's when I decided it was time to make my entrance. I opened the conference room door and rolled my wheelchair into the room. Hello, David. Hello, Emma. The silence that followed was the kind that exists just before thunder, pregnant with electricity and the promise of destruction. David's face went through a remarkable transformation: shock, terror, fury, and finally a desperate attempt to regain control. Emma simply stared, her mouth slightly open, as if seeing a ghost, which, from her perspective, she was. Sarah? David's voice cracked. But how are you? Alive? I finished. Disappointed? Emma found her voice first. You're supposed to be dead. David said, the funeral. I saw the obituary. All lies, I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the rage building inside me. David declared me dead while I was unconscious in the hospital. He's been stealing my inheritance while playing grieving widower. David recovered quickly, his mind racing for a new angle. Sarah, thank God. I thought, when the hospital called and said you were critical, I assumed the worst. I was so devastated I could barely function. Is that why you filed a fraudulent death certificate? Robert interjected, sliding documents across the table. Or why you've been liquidating her bank accounts? Emma looked between us, her world clearly imploding. I don't understand. David, you said Sarah was your wife who died in the accident, but you also said she was your birth mother, I said softly. Emma, I gave birth to you 18 years ago. I was 17, scared, and thought I was giving you a better life with Mark and Linda. Emma's legs seemed to give out. She collapsed back into her chair, staring at me with eyes that were unmistakably my own. You're my mother? Her voice was barely a whisper. I am. And David used your desire to find me to manipulate both of us. David slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Sarah, you're obviously confused from the head injury. Emma, don't listen to this. She's not thinking clearly. But Emma was studying my face now, seeing what I'd seen in those photos. The eyes, she murmured. I have your eyes. And my stubborn streak, I said, managing a weak smile. according to your great-grandmother Rose? Great-grandmother? Emma's voice rose an octave. David stood up suddenly, his composure finally cracking. Enough. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change anything. Sarah, you abandoned this girl. I'm the one who found her, who brought her into the family. We're getting married tomorrow. Over my dead body, I said, which, apparently, is what you were counting on. Robert cleared his throat. Perhaps this would be a good time to share what we discovered about Mr. Chen's recent activities. He opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table. Bank statements, forged signatures, correspondence with estate lawyers, a paper trail of systematic theft. David has been planning this for months, Robert explained. He hired a private investigator to find Emma shortly after Rose's cancer diagnosis. He's been grooming her, building trust, all while positioning himself to claim inheritance through marriage to the deceased's daughter. Emma stared at the documents, then at David. You used me. I love you, David said desperately. This money, it's what Sarah would have wanted. For us to be together. To be a family? By declaring her dead while she was fighting for her life in the hospital? Emma's voice was ice cold now. By stealing from her? By lying to me about everything? David's mask finally slipped completely. You think I enjoyed struggling for 6 years while she played house with her little teacher salary? Do you know what it's like to have talent, real talent, and watch opportunity after opportunity slip away because your wife won't take risks? So you decided to take mine instead, I said. You were never going to use that money properly anyway, David exploded. Grandmother Rose knew it. She left it to you out of obligation, not because she thought you deserved it. I would have built something with it. I would have made it matter. Emma stood up slowly, and I saw something in her expression that reminded me powerfully of Rose, a steel core that wouldn't bend under pressure. You're not just a thief, she said to David. You're pathetic. You couldn't make it as a musician, so you decided to steal from the woman who supported your dreams for 6 years. When that wasn't enough, you found her daughter and manipulated her into being your accomplice. David reached for her arm. Emma, please. We can still make this work. The money... Touch me again and I'll break your hand, Emma said with quiet fury. That's when David showed his true colors completely. He lunged not for Emma, but for me, perhaps thinking he could finish what the truck accident had started. He never made it. Robert had anticipated this possibility and positioned hospital security outside the door. 2 officers intercepted David before he could reach my wheelchair, pinning him to the floor as he screamed threats and accusations. You ruined everything, he shouted as they cuffed him. 6 years I wasted on you. 6 years of supporting your boring little life while my career died. Your career died because you have no talent, I said calmly. The only thing you were ever good at was manipulation. As they dragged him away, David made one final, desperate play. Emma, don't let her turn you against me. I'm the one who found you. I'm the one who brought you home. Emma watched him go with an expression of profound sadness. When the door closed behind him, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I had no idea. He told me you wanted to meet me but were afraid I'd reject you. He said you were sick and wanted to connect before it was too late. He used your greatest hope against you, I said. That's not your fault. But I helped him. I signed papers. I went to meetings with lawyers. I was going to marry him tomorrow. Because you trusted someone who claimed to love you. That's not a character flaw, Emma. That's evidence of your good heart. She sank into the chair beside my wheelchair, and for the first time in 18 years, my daughter and I were truly alone together. "What happens now?" she asked. I reached out tentatively, and when she didn't pull away, I took her hand. "Now we start over. We build something real, something honest." "I don't know how to be someone's daughter," she admitted. "I don't know how to be someone's mother," I replied. "But maybe we can figure it out together. Sometimes the family you find is worth more than the one you lost." 6 months later, I stood in a Charleston courtroom watching David Chen receive his sentence. 8 years for fraud, identity theft, bigamy, and attempted grand larceny. The judge had been particularly harsh about his manipulation of Emma, calling it a profound betrayal of trust that targeted a vulnerable young woman's deepest emotional needs. David showed no remorse during sentencing. Even in his orange jumpsuit, he maintained that he'd been the victim of my lack of ambition, of society's failure to recognize his talent, of a legal system that couldn't understand true love. "Your Honor," he'd said during his final statement, "I was trying to build something beautiful from tragedy. Sarah would have wanted Emma and me to be happy together." The delusion was breathtaking. Emma sat beside me in the gallery, her hand in mine. She'd testified against David with a strength that made me proud and heartbroken simultaneously. My daughter had found her voice, and it was formidable. Detective Morrison, who'd investigated the case, approached us after sentencing. "Mrs. Chen, we found something in Mr. Chen's apartment that you should see." She handed me a small wooden box, my memory box, the one I'd hidden in our bedroom closet. Inside were all my keepsakes from Emma's birth, plus editions I'd never seen before, newspaper clippings about Rose's business success, photographs of Rose's properties, and detailed financial records of the inheritance. "He'd been planning this since before your grandmother's cancer diagnosis," Detective Morrison explained. "We found evidence that he'd hired investigators to research your family's wealth months before Rose became ill." Emma examined the contents with fascination and horror. "He used everything, even this photo of us in the hospital." I picked up the picture, me at 17, exhausted but radiant, holding my newborn daughter. David had used this most precious moment as research material for his con. "I'm sorry you had to go through all of this," I told Emma as we left the courthouse. "I'm not," she said, surprising me. "If David hadn't found me, would you ever have looked for me?" The question cut deep because I didn't have a good answer. "I thought about it every day, but I was afraid you were happy and didn't want to disrupt your life." "I was happy," Emma said. "Mark and Linda are wonderful parents, but there was always this piece missing, you know? This wondering about where I came from, whether you ever thought about me." We walked along the Battery, Charleston's historic waterfront, where tourists took photos in horse-drawn carriages clip-clopped past antebellum mansions. It felt surreal to be discussing such profound things in such a picturesque setting. "I thought about you every single day," I admitted. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day. I wondered if you were smart or artistic, if you inherited my stubborn streak or your biological father's sense of humor. What was he like, my biological father?" I'd been dreading this question. Young, scared, he wasn't ready to be a parent, and honestly, neither was I. But Emma, you were created from love, even if it was young and inexperienced love. Emma stopped walking and turned to face me. Do you regret giving me up? I considered the question carefully. I regret not having 18 years of birthdays and bedtime stories and watching you become this incredible woman. But I don't regret ensuring you had parents who could give you stability and unconditional love when I couldn't. We found a bench overlooking Charleston Harbor and sat in comfortable silence, watching boats navigate the channel. The inheritance, Emma said eventually. What are you going to do with it? Rose's $8.5 million had been fully restored to my control, along with the boutique hotel properties. David's fraudulent claims had been reversed, and his stolen funds recovered. Half of it is yours, I said. It should have been yours anyway. Rose would have included you in the will if she'd known about you. Emma shook her head. I don't want money from this mess. It's not money from this mess. It's your great-grandmother's legacy. She built something incredible, and she'd want it to continue with family. We'd spent months getting to know each other. Tentative coffee dates that became regular dinners. Awkward conversations that gradually became natural. Emma had moved to Charleston to be closer to me while finishing her art history degree online. Mark and Linda had been incredibly supportive, understanding that finding me didn't diminish their role in her life. What would I do with hotel properties? Emma asked. Whatever you want. Rose always said business was about seeing possibilities others missed. Emma smiled, the first truly relaxed smile I'd seen from her since that horrible day in Robert's office. Actually, I have been thinking about something. What if we converted one of the smaller properties into a retreat center? What kind of retreat? For birth parents and adoptees. Somewhere people could come to work through reunion issues with proper counseling support. Maybe partner with adoption agencies to provide ongoing connection services. The idea was brilliant, using our painful experience to help others navigate similar challenges. Rose would have loved the entrepreneurial spirit combined with social purpose. I think that's exactly what Rose would want, I said. As the sun set over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I realized that David's betrayal had ultimately led to something beautiful. He'd brought Emma back into my life, albeit through the most twisted path imaginable. There's something else, Emma said hesitantly. Mark and Linda want to invite you for Christmas, if you're ready for that. Meeting the people who'd raised my daughter felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I'd love that. The legal aftermath continued for months. David's trial had revealed the full scope of his planning. He'd researched adoption records, studied inheritance law, and even practiced his grieving widower act on social media by posting fake relationship troubles before my accident. He was planning to kill you eventually, Detective Morrison had told me during one follow-up interview. The pills we found in your apartment, he'd been slowly increasing the dosage, likely planning to make it look like accidental overdose or suicide from depression. The thought still made me shudder. David hadn't just stolen money. He'd been slowly stealing my life. But evil plans sometimes plant seeds of unexpected grace. 2 years later, I stood in the grand ballroom of Rose's flagship Charleston Hotel, watching Emma cut the ribbon for the Emma Rose Reunion Center. The converted property was beautiful, a safe space where families torn apart by circumstance could work toward healing with professional support. Emma had thrown herself into the project with the same determination Rose had shown in building her business empire. "Today, we're not just opening a retreat center," Emma said to the gathered crowd of social workers, adoption professionals, and families. "We're acknowledging that love takes many forms. The love that lets go, the love that nurtures from afar, and the love that brings people back together when the time is right." I watched from the back of the room, tears streaming down my face. My daughter had taken our painful story and transformed it into hope for others. The past 2 years had been a journey of healing and discovery. Emma and I had learned to be family, not the traditional mother-daughter relationship we'd missed, but something uniquely ours, built on choice rather than obligation. I'd sold the Charleston house I'd shared with David and moved to a smaller property near Emma's apartment. We had weekly dinners, long walks through the historic district, and gradually, the kind of conversations I'd dreamed of having with my daughter. Mark and Linda had welcomed me into their family with the grace that spoke to their character. Christmas dinner that first year had been awkward but beautiful. 3 parents celebrating the young woman they'd all helped shape in the different ways. "You gave her life," Linda had told me. "We gave her childhood, but she became herself through her own strength." David had been denied parole twice. His lack of remorse and continued claims that he'd been the victim worked against him at every hearing. Emma and I no longer attended these proceedings. We'd given enough of our energy to his darkness. The retreat center had waiting lists for both families seeking reunion and adoption professionals wanting training. Emma had found her calling in helping others navigate the complex emotions of adoption, reunion, and family redefinition. I'd returned to teaching, but now, at the college level, developing curriculum for social work students about adoption ethics and family reunification. My experience with David had also led to consulting work with law enforcement about inheritance fraud and the manipulation tactics used against vulnerable family members. "You know what the strangest part is?" Emma said during one of our evening walks along the Battery. "I'm grateful it happened the way it did." "Grateful?" I asked, surprised. If David had been honest, if he'd told me he was married to my birth mother and she'd just inherited money, would I have believed him? Would you have trusted his motives? We probably would have been suspicious and careful and maybe never really connected. She had a point. David's elaborate deception had forced us into crisis together, stripped away the polite uncertainties that might have kept us at arm's length for years. Plus, Emma added with a wry smile, now I know exactly what red flags look like in relationships. The Emma Rose Center has a whole workshop on manipulation tactics, thanks to my education with David. We'd both learned valuable lessons about trust, family, and the difference between love and possession. David had claimed to love both of us, but real love doesn't involve control, deception, or theft. Real love, like what Mark and Linda had shown Emma, what Rose had shown me in her final months, what Emma and I were building together, requires honesty, respect, and the freedom to choose. The financial inheritance had enabled our new life, but the real wealth was the family we'd chosen to create together. Emma had parents who raised her and a birth mother who supported her dreams. I had a daughter whose forgiveness and friendship had healed wounds I didn't even know I carried. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, noticing my silence. "Rose," I said, "I think she would have loved seeing what you've built." "What we've built?" Emma corrected gently. As we walked home through Charleston's historic streets, I reflected on how betrayal had led to blessing, how loss had led to finding, how the worst person in my life had inadvertently brought me the best thing in it. Sometimes, the most beautiful families are born from the ashes of the worst betrayals. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was using your long-lost child to steal your inheritance? Have you ever had a relationship that seemed perfect until crisis revealed someone's true character? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of survival, justice, and unexpected second chances. Remember, sometimes our greatest wounds become the source of our greatest strength.